Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for another online with the Jewish Women's Archive. My name is Larissa. I'm the Associate Director of Programs and Education here at the Jewish Women's Archive, and I am so excited to be joined today by our wonderful guest teacher, Alicia Jo Rabins, who is going to be introducing some exciting new content from her Girls in Trouble curriculum. So I hope everyone is really excited to get to hear from and learn from Alicia today. I'm going to hand things over to her in just a minute or so, but I just want to go over a few things just by way of introduction. First, I just want to draw your attention to that has some tech instructions. You are more than welcome to turn on your microphones and your webcams if you would like to be visible, and also if you would like to participate in the program by speaking out loud at certain points. You're also welcome to just participate by typing in the chat box, which should be in the bottom right-hand corner of so really, whatever way you feel comfortable participating, there will be some opportunities to participate throughout the program, and we hope you will take advantage of those. When you're not speaking, please make sure to mute your microphone simply by clicking on the microphone icon. That helps us cut down on background noise and feedback and things like that. So again, when you're not speaking, please make sure that your microphone is on mute. I feel very lucky to have my wonderful intern, Shara Muroff, with me today. She's in the video next to me, and she's here to assist with any technical difficulties. So if you have any trouble, please feel free to type in the chat box, and Shara will help you out. She might start a private message with you so you can connect and figure things out together. So just very quickly, for anyone who is unfamiliar with the Jewish Women's Archive, we are a national nonprofit that's dedicated to making known the stories, struggles, and achievements of Jewish women. And on our website, you'll find the world's largest repository of voices and stories of Jewish women. And you can see our mission here. JWA documents Jewish women's stories, elevates their voices, and inspires them to be agents of change. So for us, it's not just about collecting stories and holding on to them for posterity, but also about promoting them and demonstrating their value to us today as we lead our own lives. So that's just a little bit about JWA. You can visit our website, jwa.org, to learn more. And with that, I know Alicia has a jam-packed and exciting program for us today, so I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to her. Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah, thanks, Larissa. Hi, everyone, and welcome. So I'll just very briefly say a couple words about myself in case some of you are new to my teaching and my work. I'm a musician, writer, and Torah teacher. And so sometimes I pursue those separately, but most often they're woven together, which is very fun. I feel very lucky. And one of my main projects is called Girls in Trouble, which is a song cycle about women in Torah. So every song is about a different character from Tanakh. And based on that, after getting a lot of requests from teachers who wanted to bring the songs into the classroom as teaching tools, but needed some unpacking of them because some of them are a little bit cryptic, I've been creating a curriculum. So it's basically giving each song a study guide around it, which with the original text and artistic interpretations, and also a lot of notes about my song. And it's intended for teens and adults. Anything from self-study, just somebody, you can just read through it on your own if you're interested in a character, or using it as a teaching tool for informal Jewish education, kind of peer Rosh Chodesh groups or university classrooms. Has been used in a lot of different ways. So what we're doing today is it's a little bit of an experiment because usually with these webinars I've been privileged to teach through JWA, we've done one character per webinar. Today, I wanted to try a combination of 2 units. So it might feel a little bit like a zooming. My intention is really to give us kind of a taste of these 2 different stories. And I definitely very much encourage you to go deeper into them afterwards. And Larissa's going to be on top of the chat field. So sometimes if I'm holding forth, I'll miss what you're saying. And then Larissa will jump in and say, oh, we've got a comment from somebody. So if anything is unclear or you have any thoughts, please feel free to type in the chat field because I definitely like it when things are interactive. So the theme of today is women's agency and power in the Torah. We're going to look at 2 stories which relate to that in very different ways. And I decided to start with the one that's a little more challenging, a little more troubling. And then the second story, just to keep you feeling good while we deal with the first story. The second story is a little bit more simply positive. But it'll turn out that even the first story is maybe a little bit more, it might be more agency and power than it initially seems. So before we do that, I just want to encourage you, because part of my interest is how Torah stories about women can inspire us, comfort us, help us get through the day in our ordinary lives, right? So I'm not so much of an academic. I mean, I have academic degrees, but I'm much more of an artist. And so my main interest is in personal connections to these stories. So I just want to pause for one moment as we enter into these stories to kind of warm up our own emotional selves and encourage you to think of a moment when you either had agency or power or felt like you didn't have agency or power. And if anyone would like to share them in the chat field, feel free. This is sort of our way into these stories we're beginning. And we can kind of keep moving through the text. And if something comes up throughout, feel free to just chime in. So the first story that we're going to look at is Sotah. If I could see you, I would ask you to raise your hands if you know about this story. She's a little less of a character and a little more of I can see a couple of you, but still wouldn't be representative. She's a little less of a character and more of a category of woman, as we'll see. And it's definitely a challenging story. Part of my interest with Girls in Trouble is to and it's the trouble in the name of Girls in Trouble, is to look at the stories that are not always the triumphant story. There are a surprising number of stories where women are truly listened to, maybe not at first, but in the course of the story itself, a woman convinces the people around her that she should have a voice, that she should have agency and power. And I love to bring those out. But I also love to look at the moments when that isn't necessarily happening, because I think that reflects something about the nature of life, that we have triumphant moments, we have challenges, and that seeing these Torah stories as a full mirror of the ups and downs in our lives is part of seeing the Torah as a kind of fully living document and accepting some of the challenges in our own lives. So, with that in mind, let's dive into this story of the Sotah. So, I'm going to read this biblical text. God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, if any has gone astray and broken faith with him, in that a man has had carnal relations with her unbeknown to her husband, and she keeps secret the fact that she has defiled herself without being forced, and there is no witness against her. But a fit of jealousy comes over the husband, and he is wrought up about the wife who has defiled herself. Or if a fit of jealousy comes over one, and he is wrought up about his wife, although she has not defiled herself." So this is important. We don't know what happened. "The man shall bring his wife to the priest, and he shall bring as an offering for her 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour." And I looked it up. That's about a little under 7 cups for you bakers out there. "No oil shall be poured upon it, and no frankincense shall. It is a meal offering of jealousy, a meal offering of remembrance which recalls wrongdoing. The priest shall bring her forward and have her stand before God. The priest shall take sacred water in an earthen vessel, and taking some of the earth that is on the floor of the tabernacle, the priest shall put it in the water. After he has made the woman stand before God, the priest shall bare the woman's head and place upon her hands the meal offering of remembrance, which is a meal offering of jealousy. And in the priest's hands shall be the water of bitterness that induces the spell. The priest shall adjure the woman, saying to her, if no man has lain with you, if you have not gone astray in defilement while married to your husband, be immune to harm from this water of bitterness that induces the spell. But stray while married to your husband and have defiled yourself, if a man other than your husband has had carnal relations with you, here the priest shall administer the curse of adjuration to the woman, as the priest goes on to say to the woman, may God make you a curse and an imprecation among your people, as God causes your thigh to sag and your belly to distend. May this water that induces the spell enter your body, causing the belly to distend and the thigh to sag. And the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. We're almost done. The priest shall put these curses down in writing and rub it off into the water of bitterness. He is to make the woman drink the water of bitterness that induces the spell, so that the spell-inducing water may enter into her to bring on bitterness. Then the priest shall take from the woman's hand the meal offering of jealousy, elevate the meal offering before God, and present it on the altar. The priest shall scoop out of the meal offering a token part of it and turn it into smoke on the altar. Last, he shall make the woman drink the water. Once he has made her drink the water, if she has defiled herself by breaking faith with her husband, the spell-inducing water shall enter into her to bring on bitterness, so that her belly shall distend and her thigh shall sag, and the woman shall become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is pure, she shall be unharmed and able to retain seed. This is the ritual in cases of jealousy when a woman goes astray while married to her husband and defiles herself, or when a fit of jealousy comes over a man and he is wrought up over his wife. The woman shall be made to stand before God, and the priest shall carry out all this ritual with her. The man shall be clear of guilt, but that woman shall suffer for her guilt. So it's not an easy text, but I would love to just give you a moment to give your initial responses to it. It can be just a straightforward, simple response, or your response to the question of power and agency in this text. So, do you see the woman having any power or agency here? Do you see her as simply being the subject of actions on the part of the other people around her? So, I'll just give you a moment to see if there's any responses that arise. And they can just be a purely emotional response to it. I think that's an important part of interacting with these texts is responding as a person hearing a story, which is, I think, a lot of what the Torah is, stories that is. I'll go back to the other slide for a moment.
Do we can we just jump in?
Go ahead,
Or
yeah.
yeah. Um my name is Cheryl, and I just actually taught a unit on the Sotah.
Great.
And what disturbs me and disturbed many of my students is the complete lack of agency and the power that's given over to her husband to suspect her without evidence, and that the ritual is to assuage his jealousy rather than sending him to counseling and say, get over it.
Absolutely. Yes. Agreed. And then we have a comment from Dawn as well. Where is the man's responsibility, as all relationships are dual? Yeah. Now, of course, I mean, I'll just note that we are definitely putting some modern beliefs about relationships onto this 3,000-year-old text, but we are allowed to do that because that's if we're going to interact with the text, then we're going to interact with the text as ourselves. So we're certainly not here to make excuses for it. I am going to interrogate a little bit some of these questions of power and agency, but I think that I completely agree that the pshat, the basic meaning of this text, is pretty disturbing in terms of her agency. So Lori says, why are women always responsible for the atonement? Okay. So what I want to do is first, I also actually did want to ask, um, so we don't have to go through all of these, especially because, if I was in a room with you, I would ask for some kind of like popcorn, just what does it tell us? What does it leave out? How do you imagine someone undergoing the ritual would feel? Which I think is actually a pretty interesting thing to imagine. Um, I think one important point is that, if you read about the Salem witch trials, they were trial by ordeal, but if the natural kind of thing happened, that was seen as guilt, right? So it was like you would tie a brick to a woman, and if she sank, she was seen as guilty. This is at least one redeeming thing about this, I think, is that if she is innocent, then nothing happens. There is perhaps if she's innocent, she actually becomes pregnant. You can see she shall retain seed in verse 28, which does point to one way that the later Mishnah, the later rabbinic text, interpreted this is as a way of proving paternity in an era before paternity tests. So that if she goes through this ritual and still retains her baby, her fetus, it is basically seen as proof that the fetus is the child of the husband and not based on some infidelity, which is actually quite important because um, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But the status of being, the child of an illicit affair reverberates throughout many generations. It's a very serious thing in ancient Jewish law. Gila says the last sentence bothers me. A man has no guilt, a woman has guilt. Is this true whether she is innocent or not? Yeah, that is very troubling. I totally agree. And this is another kind of thing I'll just toss out there. And if anyone does have answers to this, I encourage you to type it in, but we don't have to kind of sit and wait. But are there modern day analogs or equivalents to the Sotah ritual or a contemporary situation which resembles it? I mean, I will say one thing that I think of, we think like this is so barbaric, we would never do this. But I think in terms of the kind of court of public opinion and making this kind of humiliating judgment on a woman without taking into account all of the different factors that were happening, I think of Monica Lewinsky, who's actually been doing some pretty amazing writing and speaking about the experience that happened to her when she was a young woman, and how it was not a nuanced process of this kind of enlightened modern, let's think about the position she was in. It was like the early days of the internet, and there was this kind of mob mentality about turning her into a figure that just was not a person but represented an idea for the culture. So that's something that I find kind of interesting to think about, ways that we still don't necessarily protect people who find themselves in a complicated situation. Uh-huh. Okay, so there's some great comments coming here. Cheryl says, this ritual allows a woman to get out of being stoned just because her husband is jealous, and it also ends gossip. Okay, I think that is a very important window to open. So I am not making an apology for this text. I'm not saying like, actually, it's wonderful for these reasons. I want to really hold on to all of our issues with it. And exactly what Cheryl said. If you think about a woman in the ancient world, or even now, with an uncontrollably jealous partner, it's a challenging situation to deal with, right? And now women have the power, theoretically, legally, to leave an abusive partner, or a partner who is becoming delusional, a partner who's having issues with overwhelming jealousy. She did not have that power in this time, right? So I do think it's fascinating to think about this as healing ritual for, unfortunately, it takes place on her body. But once this has happened, and if she drinks the potion and nothing happens to her body, then if the husband continues to be jealous, he's actually disobeying or kind of failing to trust no longer his wife, but God, right? This is a divine ritual officiated by the priest, um, representing God's power of judgment. And so it's sort of like could be seen, and is seen by some scholars, as a way to address a woman's being stuck in a situation with a jealous husband.
We do have one person raising their hand. Paulette, would you like to go ahead?
If you're muted, you probably need to unmute your mic if you're speaking.
Yes. Or also, Paulette, if you're having any just like issues with your computer or anything, you can just feel free to type in the chat box as well.
Okay, and Elise brings up this, she says not exactly an analog, but when a senator says something like a woman can't get pregnant from rape. So there are still pretty troglodytic attitudes towards women's bodies. Barry says the ritual appears similar to a lie detector test, yet we have no idea as to the accuracy, the percent of women who are found guilty because the mixture itself is made to cause the change in her body. Yes, it is actually a lie detector test is a great modern analog that is pretty controversial in terms of its accuracy. There's something a little bit kind of magical about that as well. And Gila is making the point that it may not end gossip, that theoretically it should be true, but she could see people saying that she must have done something to make him jealous. So I think Gila's making this distinction between my argument, which is not just mine, but other scholars' argument that this may kind of force the husband to stop at least overtly being jealous or acting on that jealousy, but it may not stop the court of public opinion from having their own opinion, which is absolutely true. So another way of taking this story, considering this story, is to look at it through the lens of art, right? So looking at it through the lens of our kind of intellectual and emotional analysis, I think is and Elise, okay, one last thing. Elise says, if you think about what the Sotah was made to drink, it probably wouldn't cause too much sickness. We've all eaten dirt. So I think that is also very important, right? So what she's really drinking is letters scraped off of a scroll, right? The curse is down in writing in verse 23. This magical water of bitterness, which reminds me of the potions that I made as a kid, which now my kids like to make, of just kind of stirring things into water. And some dirt basically from the altar, and that is important, again, that it's not tying a brick to a woman and seeing if she stinks. It's putting these magical ingredients which in themselves are not lethal. It would be a different thing if it was poison, but the magic has to work, so that's it gives a little bit of wiggle room. I totally agree. So I'm going to now play my song, the song on the album, which you can I'll type the website in the chat field, and then if you just type Sotah in a search there, you'll find it, music.com, and the song is called Secrets. You're always watching. So if you want to listen, I have that link. It's free, it's streaming for free on the website. So the full recording is more of like a rock band kind of vibe, and I'm going to play it just acoustic for you right now, and I'm going to take off the headphones. This will sound a little folkier, but sounds a little more angry in the recording, which I just want to point out because a lot of the emotion is going to kind of come through a little bit differently right now. You're always watching and waiting for a mistake. Then you jump. Oh, you tear me apart. But I have 100 invisible doors of escape, alleys and passages leading away from my heart. Oh, my body, the secrets that you keep, and the places we run to late at night while he's asleep. He took me downtown and he gave me the jar of water. The people watched as I brought it to my lips. He said, if you're guilty, your body will betray you. But I know how to be silent after a kiss. Oh, the water was bitter and full of dark letters that stuck in my throat like a curse. But I drank it all And I answered, Amen, 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 and goodbye. You're always watching and waiting for a mistake. Then you jump, oh, you tear me apart. But I have 100 invisible doors of escape, alleys and passages leading away from my heart. Let me just plug my headset back in so we don't get issues. So, obviously these questions are, thank you so much. So obviously these questions are intended for teachers who aren't me, referring to the artist who is me. But I am interested to hear if any of this felt that it evoked similar emotions to what you felt or might have imagined the Sotah feeling, if there are differences between your interpretations, if you find kind of parts that I added. The project of both Girls in Trouble, the songs and the curriculum, it's also another kind of lens on it is that it's kind of a love letter slash exploration of love letter to slash exploration of the form of midrash. So midrash is the traditional Jewish indigenous literary form of commentary on the Torah, which takes Torah stories and kind of expands them out by adding other legends or other proposing other facts that might kind of change the story a little bit. And what I like to do is take it into the voice of the character. And I'm always looking for the place where I can also relate to the character in some way. So, not in this presentation, but in the curriculum itself, I have an essay called Behind the Music, where I write about what I was thinking when I was writing the song. And I also have an annotated, a page of annotated lyrics where there's each verse that I'm referring to is kind of linked there. And if there's other midrashim or commentaries that I came across in my research before writing the song, often I'll kind of nod to them in the song. That comes with the curriculum as well. And I'll just say a couple words about this before we move on to the visual art. One thing that I love to do is kind of follow the Hasidic tradition of taking a story in the Torah and translate an internal emotional narrative, right? So, like Hasidic narrative might say, there's a commandment that the everlasting light in the temple, right, the fire can never go out, and that means that the fire of your love for God can never be dimmed. So I really love that kind of interpretive move of taking this thing that seems very ancient and unrelatable on the surface and saying, no, it's actually a sort of a projection of something that happens inside all of us on a very personal level. So when I read about this song, I thought about this character of the jealous husband as perhaps a kind of embodiment of perfectionism and self criticism that I deal with, that many people that I know deal with. Just that tendency of the human mind to be sitting there for a mistake, waiting for a portrayed, a perceived kind of straying from what exactly you should have done, what exactly you should have said. And I thought of the two parts of the self of just kind of the part of the self that's just living each moment trying to do their best as representing this wife suspected of like always maybe straying or doing something wrong, and then the part of the self that can be overcritical representing the husband, and thinking I kind of wanted to give that well-intentioned self a little bit of power, a little bit of um, a kind of secret inner life where that part of the self could say, you're just always going to be there. It's kind of the idea of befriending the trolls in your mind of like you're always going to be there, jealous husband. But I have places that I can go to nourish myself that are not you. So And then, okay, Cheryl, what if the woman is guilty of adultery? Your song seems to project the feelings of someone who is innocent. That's interesting. My intention was to leave it, yes, and Dawn says she didn't hear it that way, and that is just, I think any piece of art, you put it out there, and I think the artist's intentions are kind of secondary. So that's my little bonus of what I was thinking about. But it's not necessarily the right interpretation. I mean, your interpretation is as legitimate as mine. And right, I tried to hear, or maybe Dawn was responding to the innocent, but I tried to keep it kind of vague as to whether she was guilty or not, because I thought that was kind of one of the most interesting things about the story is this uncertainty, right? The story itself or the ritual itself grows out of the uncertainty of whether or not she's guilty. If there are witnesses, there are witnesses. That's a different process. Um, and if there's no suspicion, there's no suspicion, right? But if there's suspicion and no witnesses, that is the fundamental situation we find ourselves in. So I wanted to keep the character sort of on that, in that unclear place. So the fact that she's keeping secrets and that she's, it's like, is she physically running off with her body, or is this a kind of inner escape? What the I know how to be silent as a kiss after a kiss. So I kind of wanted to leave both possibilities open. Oh wow, yes, that's an interesting. Um, Erica says that he took me downtown and gave me the jar of water, makes her think of the date rape drug. That's a very interesting observation, which I had never thought of. So the last thing I'll say about this song is that um, the last portion of each curriculum is encouraging people to make their own creative interpretation, which doesn't mean it has to be some giant masterpiece, but it can be a paragraph or a short movement interpretation. And so if that's something that interests you, and especially if you have a different take than mine, or if you imagine her differently, I definitely encourage you to do that. And there's a gallery on the Girls in Trouble website where you can upload your interpretation as well. So there's this sort of Talmudic, um, modern interpretation of stories of women in Torah that we're building on there. So please feel free to join us there. And now we'll just look at a little bit of visual art before we move on to the next story. I also have one brief academic commentary. So this is actually, I'm not sure who we're trying to find out, but we haven't yet been able to find out who did this illustration. And we can just notice the choices that the artist made, right? So how does her face look? How does her body look? This is like that moment of unveiling and the kind of tortured look on the face of the husband here. It's pretty powerful. And then there's that altar in the background. And Dawn is noticing some defiance in the song with the amen, amen, and goodbye. That was definitely my intention. There's a different envisioning. That's another old kind of public domain image that we're working on finding where it's from, but we haven't. But there's a lot of old kind of etching illustrations of the Bible. And so, if you look at these side by side, um, they're similar in many ways, but also, with her being on her knees in one of them, with her in one of them, she's kind of standing and turning her face away. Maybe that's a bit more agency than being kind of on her knees bent down. One of them, she's standing between her husband and the priest, and one of them, the husband is kind of hovering behind the priest in this sort of threatening way. So it's interesting to look at the decisions that people make. And again, to my mind, then we get to draw whatever sotah we want in whatever medium we want. This is a very interesting work online, which I encourage you to check out. It's available online for free. The Brick Testament, and this person illustrated the Bible in Lego figures. And so here is the Sotah story from there. And I just thought there's something so fascinating about taking this bizarre ancient story and translating into these little like children's action figures and kind of simplifying it, making it at once kind of productive, but kind of also getting down to the basics of it. And then there's I don't know if any of you know the really brilliant contemporary artist. She's from Israel, lives in New York, named Ofri Kanaani, and she did this immersive video installation called the Sotah Project, and she it's a very contemporary midrash essentially. And I'll just read the text. So her midrash is on a midrash, right? So there's a collection of midrash called Tanchuma, and there's a midrash about the Sotah story, which kind of takes the ritual and says, "Wow, what would happen if this happened?" So it recounts the tale of two sisters, Sotah and Bechora, who are bound together in symbiotic loyalty when Sotah's husband accuses her of infidelity. Video projections on all four walls of the exhibition space allow multiple narratives to develop concurrently, thus calling into question the notion of a single coherent truth. The Sotah project uses the most current new media technologies while employing storytelling techniques inspired by ancient Greco-Roman murals and Renaissance tapestries. So these are stills from the video. It's quite powerful, and I just love the way that she takes that kind of uncertainty and the multiple narratives and makes it into an extremely contemporary, um, um, translates it into an extremely contemporary medium. Uh, I want to also paste one. I actually just came upon this recently and it didn't make it in the slideshow, but I do want to paste it into the chat field and I will also read it to you. This is a really fascinating the video. If you Google if you go to Ofri Kana'ani's website, you can find the trailer for it. The full project is an immersive, like, it's like they built these walls and they were simultaneously projecting multiple videos. So you can't see that because there's no way to represent it. But there's, I think, there's a trailer, I think, about the making of it, and then there's a trailer of kind of clips from it. So you can definitely find more. Okay, so I want to just end this with, I just pasted this in the chat field. In traditional Jewish law, okay, so this is a lawyer who also studies Jewish law, and she wrote this amazing essay. The link is at the bottom if you want to read it later, about how this ritual could have really helped women. So she says, in traditional Jewish law, nothing has replaced the Sotah ritual. In Jewish family law, as it is applied in contemporary Israeli society, there is no process, magical or otherwise, for legitimating the mamzer, which is the suspected child of illicit parent. If the woman has an affair, gets pregnant, right? There's no way to legitimize that child, or forcing a husband to give his wife a divorce. So if you read the whole article, you'll see she reads this ritual as a way to legitimize a baby, as I said, of suspected, of like uncertain paternity, right? So if the husband's really jealous, this ritual happens, she keeps the baby. That means that God is saying that it's the husband's baby. So legally, the baby is kosher, and all these ramifications that occur if a baby is born out of wedlock in the strict Orthodox community are spared, right? Um, and there's also an interpretation where the husband would have to give his wife a divorce if he is after the ritual, if he's still jealous, right? So she's saying we've lost that by losing this ritual. And she says we are left with Bronze Age laws and information age sensibility. Approaching the text of our tradition with our post Enlightenment and postmodern thinking, it is easy to forget that the ancients believed in magic. When the magic is abandoned and only the brutality of the law remains, it is the vulnerable members of our society who suffer. Um, she's not just saying this based on kind of like theories. She's saying this based on volunteering for women who in the under Israeli law basically have no way out. And she's saying what I'm seeing is that this would have released them from all these terrible problems that they're dealing with right now. So again, I'm not saying that to make it that this is like a wonderful story that we should all be celebrating, but it is pretty fascinating to hear that, for people who are still living within strict biblical law, this could have had a very different effect. I just wanted to share that with you. Oh, I forgot. Oh, yeah.
Alicia, sorry to jump in. Cheryl had a question a couple minutes ago that I thought was very interesting. She asked, "What happons if the adultery is with another woman?"
That's very interesting. I mean, my
understanding,
I am not an expert on this, but my understanding is that that would not really be. I think that because the rabbis didn't really respect female sexual relationships, they weren't as afraid of them or as concerned about them as they were about a woman being with another man. So not because they were so progressive, but because they just didn't consider it. We consider that to be sort of a betrayal of the same level. But I think that they didn't really see that as a legitimate liaison, and so I don't think that was part of their thinking, especially because there is this concern about paternity that kind of weaves through this. So I think that's my instinct. A scholar might say differently, but yeah. So okay, I will truly end this with just a couple poems, which are from my book, and these are directly inspired by the Sotah ritual. So in the magic, it's sort of a different midrash where I imagine Sotah, this woman, maybe 2 or 3 decades down the road, and she kind of went through the ritual and she learned some things about how people see women, and and she started a beauty for girls in her basement. So here's my another imagination. The magic. My students visit me in the basement. I hand each one a small well of ground up letters, the color of crushed pearl, a cream base for lids. We study the magic of powder, shadow, wand, brush, till beauty beats their faces with its little tendrils, and red butterflies settle on their cheeks. Let my thighs sag, girls. Let my belly distend. Let me teach you about beauty, a slanted shipwreck draped in its own torn sails. That's one take. And then another, it's kind of funny that I have two poems about Sotah in my little book of poetry. Another one is about teaching bat mitzvah students, which I've been doing for 18 years. And I've had, I think, 4 who have been assigned the portion of the Sotah. So this is about my experience with that. How to sail. Scrape the curse off the parchment. Stir the broken letters into a jar of water. Make a woman drink it. Thus said Elohim. But why? Thus said Molly, 12 years old. Now I was the teacher. We sat there, 2 black flames in a room of white fire. We were sailing on a wind that passed through the open window of a room next to the marketplace 2,000 years ago. So that one is partially just inspired by the mystery of reading these stories and knowing how many other people have read them. And then here we are today, literally at this moment, still kind of unpacking, wrestling with these stories from our heritage. Okay, so I do want to get to the second story now, which is a little bit more just unconditionally positive, I would say. The daughters of Tzelofchad. The daughters of Tzelofchad of the Manasseh family, son of Hefer, son of Gilead, son of Machir, son of Menashe, son of Joseph, came forward. The names of the 5 daughters were Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Titzah. They stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the chieftains, and the whole assembly at the tent of meeting, at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not one of the faction, Korach's faction, which banded together against God, but died for his own sin, and he has left us no sons. Let not our father's name be lost to his clan just because he had no son. Give us a holding among our father's kinsmen." Moses brought their case before God, and God said to Moses, "The plea of Tzelofchad's daughters is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen, transfer their father's share to them. Further speak to the Israelite people as follows. If a man dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter. If he has no daughter, property to his brothers. If he has no brothers, you shall assign his property to his father's brothers. If his father had no brother, you shall assign his property to the nearest relative in his own clan, and he shall inherit it. This shall be the law of procedure for the Israelites in accordance with God's command to Moses." So, I will acknowledge that this is saying if there are no sons, then the daughters can. It would be really great if the answer were, oh, women should inherit right along with men. Why wouldn't they? However, justice happens in steps often. And in terms of the question of agency and power in the Torah, I absolutely love this story because it's a group of women noticing gender-based discrimination, essentially, making a case to Moses, who brings it to God, and God, without a lot of back and yes, this is correct, right? So the biggest level is that it's actually a question of inheritance and keeping land within a certain tribe, but they have no problem with allowing daughters to inherit land, at least when there are no sons, which does give the daughters a certain kind of power that they didn't have before, at least women who find themselves in that situation. So again, I think much more than the Sotah. The Sotah story, we can kind of go into the recesses of the ways that it may have surprisingly given her agency and power, although it doesn't seem like it on the surface. This, I think, is a little more of the opposite, where on the surface, it's great. It's a step forward. They're activists. We can also use our kind of modern critical minds to say, look at all these other ways that there's still a discrimination. But I also love that the women speak for themselves, that it's not that they have a male intermediary who goes to Moses. It's just the 5 women going. So I'll invite also just a couple initial responses, questions. This is just kind of an imaginative question of, do you imagine they were all entirely united, or do you think there might have been discussion between them, disagreement between them, and whether you can think of any modern day analog or equivalent. So you can kind of keep those coming as you think of them. And the lyrics to we're not going to listen to this song right now, I think. We'll see if we still have a couple minutes at the end, we will. But this was a really fun song to write, and you can listen to it streaming on the website. Actually, you know what? Let's just listen to it. So Larissa's going to press play on it, but we noticed that it's really loud for some reason, and the software isn't allowing her to bring down just the volume of that. So take 1 minute to just kind of lessen your volume a little bit so that it doesn't blast you. And you can listen to the song. And before you do, I will just say that one of the little behind the music tricks is that I had 5 of my own voices in there during the choruses. So I really tried to give each of the sisters their own song line.
Okay, I'll go ahead and press play. Like Alicia said, we definitely suggest turning your volume kind of like way down, because for some reason it comes across pretty loudly and we don't want to blast anyone's ears out. So here we go.
I've been trying to explain, the parts are different, but the sum is the same. Trying to get you to realize that half the winner's taking all of the prize. One, two, three, four, 5. Still breathing, still alive. But when I disappear, will anybody know that I was here? Two sides of a river, two sides of a coin, and a place in the middle where both sides join. The light of the moon and the light of the sun, and a place in the dark where the two become one. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You tell us how it's done, but your daughters and your sons, we know arithmetic will come. and we disappear. Will anybody know that we were here?
Okay, a little bit of disco about biblical inheritance laws. Let me turn my webcam back on. Okay. So, when I when I wrote about writing this song in my behind the music essay, I said that it was a real challenge to think about how to take a story about biblical inheritance law and make it into an interesting song. And so it was actually one of my favorite challenges of writing the 25 songs I've written for Girls in Trouble, um, because I got to basically write about math and feminism and also the existential anxiety of what happens after we die? Will anyone remember us? And so I think about that in terms of inheritance, and I also think of it in terms of activism and of trying to leave the world a better place and know that we may not literally be remembered by name, but that kind of legacy can is an inheritance that we can really have control over. So that was some of what I was thinking about this. I'm just going to glance at the um, okay. So briefly, there's a question about the sailing and the Sotah stories. So um, it was called How to Sail. There's a bunch of how-to poems in the book, and I was just using an image of a kind of the wind of the story being wind that we were sort of using to sail now, just as people have for many centuries had conversations inspired by these stories. And that's interesting that Alicia says, thinking about the media around Princess Charlotte yesterday, who's set to inherit, but we had this almost 3,000 years ago in the Torah. Interesting. Um, I'll just give you a brief little tour of the daughters in art. So here's some of those old etchings, and we have this kind of, you know, he's teaching from the knees, and then also kind of standing. I like that they have kind of one person going forward. Um, Here's some different interpretations. I mean, I would love to see the interpretations of what's going on in all of your minds right now. How do you imagine them? What are what's the composition? Are they all clustered? Do they send one person? Gila's saying, especially like the concept that a person's input can change the laws. If this was the way Orthodox Judaism thought, changes could happen further. Interesting. Okay. I'm skipping that last one because we don't quite have permission to use it yet, but and this is this amazing Israeli artist who stages photographic reenactments. So here's the five daughters, really quite lovely. So that is our flying flyover vision of two very, very different takes of women's agency and power in the Torah. One thing I hope you can carry forward from this is the power of our interacting with the stories critically and emotionally, right? So using our kind of intellectual minds to interrogate them, to look maybe beneath the first layer of the meaning. How research and learning more can unpack the stories in a deeper way, and at the same time, how our initial kind of emotional responses and the way that they resonate with us and they feel right or they feel wrong, they feel like something to emulate or something to fight against. The power of that response, I think, is a sacred part of our interaction with Torah. And that if you are someone who likes to write or journal or do movement, dance, sketch, you can be a professional artist or you can just be someone idea. And so I really encourage you to bring that into your own relationship with some of these stories, if that's interesting to you. And finally, I hope that you got a little deeper glimpse into women from the Torah, a kind of category of women, the Sotah, and some actual characters, the daughters of Tzelofchad. who in different ways kind of challenge our ideas of what women in the ancient world were doing, and hopefully can inspire us to live our own lives right now in a way that is the most meaningful possible, whether that's on an internal emotional level or in a kind of more external activist justice seeking level like the daughters. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present to you, and I'm easy to get in touch with if you want to. I'll type my personal website where there's a contact form, and there's also the Girls in Trouble site, which has all of our songs streaming with lyrics, and then the full curriculum units are also downloadable on that page. So there's a lot there, and thank you so much for being part of this. I think Larissa has some closing words. Great.
I do. I just want to address this one question from Aliza. She was asking if you're building these into larger curricular pieces like your other lessons, or if they're going to
Wonderful.
stay
Yeah.
as
So
these mini
basically, there are
courses. She's
10
thinking about
full
using them for
curriculum
a
units
shorter
that are
class.
published on the website, that are they're downloads that you can purchase on the website. This is all, I should say, thanks to the generosity of the Covenant Foundation, which has been supporting this project from the beginning, and that's why I'm able to be here and do this. We are now in a second round of creating shorter mini units for the remaining 14 characters. And essentially, we thought, oh, we'll just make little bite-sized ones, but then we can't, my collaborator, Rory Michelle Sullivan, and I can't resist putting in some of the amazing stuff we find. So essentially, what we're trying to do is have a lesson plan that's a bite-sized 45-minute thing. So that's ready to go out of the box. But then there are still a bunch of additional resources that can be used if you want to go deeper. So it's a little bit of a hybrid, the remaining 14 units. And we'll be publishing them over the next 2 years. So hopefully these two and Vashti might be out in maybe summer, is the idea.
And I will just mention too, just for anyone who doesn't know, that on jwa.org, we do have condensed versions of the first 10 lessons. So if you're interested in using those, but you're looking for like a shorter, more bite-sized thing.
Yes, and those are free. So definitely, if you have a bite-sized, you don't have a ton of time to prepare, don't have a ton of time to do it, I would definitely encourage you going there.
Perfect. So Alicia, thank you so much. I realize it's already 2 o'clock. I have just one announcement and one other thing. If you have to leave, that's okay. I will go quickly, but just a couple of small things I wanted to mention. For anyone who is local to the Boston area, we are doing this really fun live podcast event on May 9th with Anita Diamond to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Red Tent. I think it's going to be a really fun and exciting event. So if you are in Boston and you're interested, I believe it's taking place at Boston University Hillel. You can go ahead and click on that register link for more information. It'll just open in another tab. So again, if you are available that night and in Boston, we would love to see you at our live podcast event. Finally, thank you for coming to this program today. Your feedback is very important to us. And so we'd love to hear from you about